Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on flexible working in a post-pandemic world, hosted by the British Council for Offices alongside Arney Fender Katsalidis architects. So the BCO was really the catalyst for our research into flexible offices, which surveyed how space was used and spatial qualities, everything from where people sit to the quality of light, to the air that's flowing through the spaces, and also looking at the growth of the sector. So obviously it started quite a while ago now in San Francisco in the tech sector, in the West Coast of America, and grew over the years to what we know it as now. And also we studied its evolution, so looking at how from quite a niche concept it's become quite well known, and also as different entrants have come into the market, notably landlords who have seen their tenants work quite successfully within the sector and then gone on to offer their own versions of flexible working. So we've got a great array of panelists this morning. We've got perspectives from an architectural background, academic, and also a flexible operator to give really a rounded viewpoint of where we're at in terms of flexible working. So my name's Helen Parton. I'm a journalist and author. I wrote a book entitled Total Office Design in 2011. Looking at the impact of the workspace, which was then being influenced by the 2008 financial crisis. And there was a movement towards more cost-effective workplace solutions and taking in sustainability. I also edited On Office magazine for 3 years. And I'm joined by Lisa Cations, Head of Enterprise Solutions, EMEA at HANA, Earle Arney, founder and CEO of Arney Fender Katsalidis Architects, and Jeremy Myerson, who is a director of WorkTech Academy, and the Helen Hamlin Professor of Design, which is part of the Royal College of Art. So before we get on to our expert discussion, audience, you have a little bit of work to do. So we've got a couple of polls that we'd like to get your take on. Also get thinking about some questions towards the end. So our first poll question is, let's look at that. So it is about, will flexible offices be able to weather the workplace storm and re-emerge as a powerful force in the marketplace? So we've got yes, no, uncertain. Be bold there, ladies and gentlemen, and see what you think about that. So the second poll question is your organisation considering reducing your long-term leases and taking up flexible office space? So again, yes, no, is part of the office space requirements will be provided as part of your, will be provided by flexible office providers. So I can see some poll results coming in already. So yeah, we'll give the results of those later on. And without further ado, I'm gonna start the discussion. So I've talked in the introduction about the profile of customers that are part of the flexible office setup. That's obviously evolved over the years, that's only natural. So let's look from now onwards, I guess. So will the profile of customers change for flexible offices? And Lisa, I'd like to come to you on that. I think you've got an interesting perspective from there.
No, definitely. Thank you, Helen. And just by way of introduction, Lisa Cations, heading up Enterprise Solutions in HANA. And my background is real estate, working across international markets and across corporate and investor clients. So in HANA, we are working with the large occupiers, helping them solution and provide flexible space. So, and I think from this sort of question, we absolutely are keen to expand our customer profile. And I think, Helen, what you're saying is that our personal view is that we will see actually much larger set of occupiers, because in my experience, I'm dealing with the enterprise clients who are adopting flex in unprecedented scale. So our expectation is 15 to 20% of the portfolio of the corporate clients will be dedicated to flex. So it's a large proportion, as we can see, but equally the traditional users of Flex who are startups or some sort of entrepreneurs, we do believe that those clients will still remain in Flex, because the alternative for them, and the expectation was that with the next downturn, those type of clients will go into Starbucks or some sort of cafes, and then will sort of use this retail space to work distantly. But now with the COVID-19, we do think that it's actually an increased risk for them. So, and then some of the users of Flex, they have an alternative to work from home, but not everyone really, and it's not a conducive environment for occupiers to be productive in the home setting. So we do believe that those sort of small occupiers will stay, and entrepreneurs will still adopt Flex. But equally, another emerging sort of niche is going to adopt Flex more as the small businesses. So those leases that had maybe 5,000 to 10,000 square feet on the traditional long-term basis, the companies are now furloughing people, maybe seeing some cash constraints, so they will be converting from traditional space into Flex. So we do believe that there will be a larger adoption, and especially the Flex providers like HANA, who are taking health, safety, and sanitization very seriously and provide the safe place for people to work. We do believe that there will be a larger set of occupiers coming into Flex.
Excellent, thanks, Lisa. Jeremy, can I come to you on your take on that particular aspect?
Yes, good morning, everybody. Just by way of introduction, I'm an academic and researcher based at the Royal College of Art, where I'm the Helen Hamlin Chair of Design, as Helen said, where we do a lot of research into new ways of working and new environments for work. And also I'm director of Work Tech Academy, which is this global knowledge network looking at basically how we'll work tomorrow. And the Flex story is very much a big part of that. And there are two schools of thought about what's going to happen to the market in the post-COVID scenario. The first is that the army of freelancers and contractors and startups and who have been traditionally in co-working spaces and flex spaces, that they are going to melt away. They're going to work from home. They're not going to be able to afford the subscriptions. In the short term, that might be true, but I think particularly the startups will come back to flexible space, because the kinds of activities that startups need, that you cannot do it all virtually. You need face-to-face interaction. The interesting picture is around corporates who have been kind of looking at the flex market, putting their toe in the water. And now with what's going to be clearly a blended scenario of remote working and physical face-to-face work in offices, the flexible market is a very good piece of elastic that will allow corporate to balance their portfolio. And I agree totally with Lisa that the enterprise clients are going to comprise a growing part of the flex market. And although the co-working and the service office market is experiencing, like all corners of real estate, they're really in trouble in the short term. In the medium term, I think it's going to be a lot more positive.
Okay. So there are suggestions that the hub and spoke model, which is where organisations have one small central location and smaller flex workspaces in city fringes or suburbs, may become more mainstream for organisations going forward. How likely do you think this is? Jeremy, I'm going to come to you because I know you've got a particular interest in this area of how the sector is going to grow.
Yeah, I mean, as a keen student of the history of the modern office, if you like, and I've been looking at how workplaces shape cities and cities shape workplaces, and the whole relationship between urban geographies and how workplaces are organized. I think we're not going to lose central business districts. People are still going to travel into central areas, but I think they're going to move into these areas more sporadically and for different reasons. I think city centre offices will be more like event-based. You go in for mentoring or training or innovation purposes. I don't think there's going to be the blanket commute in and out. There's going to be more staged working, if you like. And correspondingly, I think there's going to be a growth in what might be termed local working. Co-working and serviced office providers are already looking around London at suburban locations where people don't have to jump on public transport. And in the short term, that's a massive issue with COVID. So I think the hub and spoke idea of companies having more local satellite and suburban offices, I think that could become more of a reality. And there could be a lot of joint ventures, for example, with retail and hospitality, to provide co-working desks in different areas around the city. So it becomes a multi-nodal approach to work rather than the traditional 20th century model of the central business district.
Yeah, interesting. Earle, I'd like to bring you in here, if I may, to get your take on this particular idea.
Thanks, Helen. I should also just introduce myself too. For all of my sins, I'm an architect, and our firm acts, we're architects and interior designers, so we act for end users and developers. So I'll answer your question on the hub and spoke in that frame. And maybe it's a bit awkward me going after Jeremy, because I actually agree for the most part with what Jeremy's saying. I know you want a bit of attention in the panel, but I think as Jeremy would agree, there's not one size that would fit all. And let's just explore that for a moment. I mean, we're obviously been in this incredibly condensed period of change, and as employers, we've had to renegotiate a social contract with our employees. Right? The turning up to work to evidence your effort has gone, and flexible, decentralised working is now a norm and part of the office landscape. So how does that work going forward? In the surveys that we've conducted and what our developer clients and also end users tell us is that there's a range of responses, and there's differing desires. If you're at the beginning of your career and you're balancing a laptop on your knee in your bedroom, you'll want to get back to the office as quickly as you can. They're desperate to get back. If you're lucky enough to live in a bucolic area, an area that is a home that is conducive for home working, the desire is less so. But what is common with both of those groups is the link between home and office and the public transport. So I can see that the satellite hubs might well be very, very attractive, particularly as we go through this waxing and waning concern about public transport and being exposed and connected to people, as well as those who are maintaining a routine. But I do think there might be some hubris about the hub and spoke, and those who are suggesting a totally radical shift to hub and spoke, I question. I don't think the centre part of cities will change. The office certainly isn't dead. But cities are likely to become younger still. And we still know that there's an age differential between those who live in cities and those who live outside. But those satellites, those hubs on the periphery and maybe in the commuter belt might well become the silver fox satellites, because they're older people. They're lucky enough to live out in that area. They might be moving to a hub area to get away and get some distance and some routine from the family. So then it raises questions as to whether it's just providing a functional opportunity being at the office, or whether it offers everything that the cosmopolitan central office does with younger people, mix of different people doing their various tasks in different age groups. But I do think, and the final point here, is the change in the high street. And we've seen earlier this week the creation of a new use class, Class E, which enables a move between commercial, retail, office uses without essentially needing planning permission. So as we see the high street decreasing in terms of its traditional old school retail that is no longer viable in many, many locations, I think we're going to see those being turned over to exciting blends of leisure and office, really breathing life into these satellite hubs.
Okay, that's interesting. I love the idea of, what was it, silver?
A silver fox satellite.
Silver fox satellite. I love that. I think that's going to fly as a phrase. So let's look at the technology piece there, and technology's role in cushioning, or in some cases exacerbating, the impact of COVID-19 on office space, particularly flexible office space. So I guess this is a question for everyone, but perhaps Earle, if I can come back to you and then loop back to Lisa and Jeremy on technology and sort of friend or foe, or how that's going to impact the flex offer.
Sure. Look, I think from both a workplace interior and architecture standpoint, physical spaces will become a reflection of our digital networks and digital spaces. And I think technology will be an enabler, and it'll also be an insulator. So just imagine if it was 1918 and COVID-19 is the Spanish flu. The seamless shift to a decentralized workforce that most knowledge organizations have done over the last 3 to 4 months just wouldn't happen. So technology is obviously something that has unlocked that for us. And I think has brought us, forward maybe 10 years. There's been an inertia, perhaps through our own acceptance of the technology that has already been there for some of the reasons I mentioned before. So technology is certainly an enabler. I think it's also an insulator. Now we're currently in the design phase of office buildings in the centre of the City of London and also on the periphery. Very different products. But again, what links all of those things is that clearly the developers see themselves as part of offering a wellness offer. So what does that mean? It's quite conceivable with all the technology that we have that the office, the workplace, might well be the safest environment that you could ever go to outside your own home. Now, that might be on account of the seamless entry that enables a linkage of facial recognition to track and trace. And we might think it's fanciful, but every time there's been a crisis, be it terrorist or biological, there's been a softening of people's concerns about privacy matters. So it's really quite conceivable that the way in which we allow people to enter the buildings might well mean that there's a right of entrance which is linked to track and trace and to healthiness. So you can be guaranteed as an occupier that that is one of the safest places to be. And just an anecdote to this. Last night I went to my local pub. Before I could actually order a pint, I had to scan a QR code and sign up to the track and trace. So it's coming if it's not already here.
Okay. Jeremy, what's your take on this?
Well, I think that technology will be a very big part of the tech offer. The co-working flex space offer. And I think one of the attractions of flexible workspace in the post-COVID era is that they're already curated. They're already managed. People have to be members. There's an orchestration of the flow of people and information and data through these spaces. And the offer that flexible operators can make is that they can really curate a superior experience with better standard of hygiene and more control of people and populations moving through compared to a normal office campus, which is a bit of a free-for-all. So I think that technology, there'll be the technologies of superior air filtration. There will be the technologies of contactless access and workplace apps to order your coffee and book a space. And I think also we must recognize that future meetings will not be based around everybody being present in a space. Some people will be present and some people will join virtually. So flexible space providers have the opportunity to really up the game on technology so that you can have these blended physical virtual meetings. So tech is a massive part of the offer going forward.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. Lisa, over to you to get your perspective on this.
Yes, thanks, Helen. I think from the utilization perspective, I'd like to sort of highlight the use of technology and how it's going to be impacting even the efficiency, further efficiency in the way how first the space is utilized, but equally how we pay as we use the space, as opposed to having this extra capacity built and then not utilized. So we use sensors and a lot of the smart technology and neuroscience to actually design the space and make it really efficient. And I guess to emphasize the point around the sort of the flow of people and how the meeting space potentially could actually see a high increase in usage, and then the desks might be just this sort of touch points. So we do believe that technology on the operational side will play a big role, and also in terms of design and utilization. So for example, what we're talking to clients about is to offer them some sort of package with meeting space plus shared desks and some dedicated suites, because there's a lot of uncertainty how this space will be utilized, how many people come in, and on what sort of days of the week. And then we will reassess that. And previously, this information has never been really translated from the landlord to operator or to the occupier, because it's normally, if you're in the co-working space, the co-working operator is just holding this information to themselves to then utilize it in the future assets to create this efficiency and sweat the assets. But what we are trying to do now is to share this information both with on the anonymous basis, but with the users of space, so that they don't actually need to buy more than what they actually use. And then we share this on the regular basis so that they can actually assess the occupancy, and then maybe review the way how much space they need. And equally, HAN is partnering with the landlords. So in the future design and the further take up of space, we can actually create a much more efficient space, maybe with bigger provision of meeting rooms, or some sort of different setup, depending on how many boardrooms need to be created, or smaller focus rooms. So I feel like it will be a bit more data driven, and the efficiency will definitely improve going forward, thanks to technology.
Yeah, sounds like technology will save us in some degree in terms of the flexible model. So in terms of knowing when people will come in, and providing that reassurance for people as they come in about where they can go and where they can, you know, safely work and what have you, which is incredibly interesting. So let's come on to another aspect of the flexible working model, which I think is really an intrinsic part of it, which is that sense of community, which is the reason why, you know, the sector first evolved to a certain degree, when you had people working from home who were thinking, you know what, this isn't working for me, you know, psychologically and sociologically. So, you know, getting together. And as the models evolved, you've got all these great programs, from thought leadership to yoga to, you know, that idea of being sat next to someone and then having, you know, a casual conversation, which could then help your business. So that idea of community has been a selling point of flexible space for as long as they've existed, really. So is this going to change now that we can, you know, with social distancing and with the idea that we're not meant to be as close in proximity to people as we once were? Lisa, I'm going to get your take on that one.
Yeah. No, thanks, Helen. So yeah, I do believe in the short term, definitely this whole community aspect will be affected, and with the COVID-19 and the way how we come back into the office, that definitely will be reduced. So, and also I feel that the more enterprise clients will be adopting the flex space, the community will not be just sort of the enabler for all the startups. You almost need to have a segmented community curated experience to those companies who are occupying space within flex. And then say the company that is more than 20 people, they actually don't, and the research shows that they want to build their own culture, their own connections within the company. They don't seek this sort of external relationships with other tenants or members within the flex space. So I feel that going forward, maybe it's going to be both digital and physical, but in the shorter term, it's going to be very, very hard to create this spontaneous conversations in the flex space. And equally, you know, we have concierge services, and the community manager is on site. So going forward, I would even say that the corporate clients would need to create their community and almost this rituals, or enable these meetings and different setup of meetings, because people will come to the office for these gatherings, and you need to create not just the community, but also curate the meeting experience. And I do believe that this purpose of co-creation, of collaboration, and also the services and experience around that, that could also have an extra layer of sort of curated management that will be required.
Okay. Now, Earle, I'm sure you've got some thoughts from an architectural perspective. So would you care to share those?
Sure, Helen, thanks. I think, you know, probably the answer to your question is a rhetorical question. If you can work anywhere, why would you work from the office? And I think what I'm hearing is that there is a redefinition in people's minds as to the purpose, the key purpose for the office. And it falls within three things in terms of collaboration, community, and connection. And interwoven and weaving those things together is the culture of an organisation. You think back, I mean, when I started outside university, I had to punch a clock just to evidence that I was there in the office. It was a knowledge work role. And it was about observation and proving application of task. The really informed organisations have known for some time that the workplace is an instrument of engagement and an instrument of levering, you know, that great cost, which is knowledge workers. And if you think about some of the work we've done with Jeremy's organisation, Deloitte in Canada, Macquarie in Australia, there's been a radical shift of those organisations that have seen and really fully engaged that whole idea of using the workplace to build collaboration and interaction. And there's only so much of that you can get from a flat screen as we're experiencing now. And, you know, just picking up on the energy of people. And I know from an employer's standpoint, I miss the observation of just, and the engagement with all the people. So I think that there's an innate human desire that is about connection, that is about sociability, and the workplace has a role to play for all of that. So I think, you know, community, collaboration, and also connection are those three things that we will see as being one of the great motivators of getting back to work, be that the flex office spaces or centralised spaces.
Interesting stuff. Now, Lisa, we can see behind you what HANA looks like, and it looks, you know, greening the office, looks lots of natural materials and some wonderful, you know, concepts there design-wise. But so I think what might be interesting for people who maybe aren't familiar with HANA, just to get your take on what the market's looking like at the moment and overall, yeah.
No, of course, and I will share my perspective also sort of from what I'm seeing by talking to the corporate clients and the landlords, because we're partnering with both sides, but also I will cite some of the research that was recently published by CBRE, where a CBRE research team asked 126 CRE executives about the sort of the sentiment and what they're seeing in the market. So that is sort of backed up by the evidence. But what we're seeing quite a lot is that around sort of 75% of the real estate executives responded to the survey that they are reviewing the portfolio strategies. So definitely every single corporate in the world is trying to see how they can densify their space, how they can optimize their portfolio, restructure leases, potentially contract or consolidate some of the assets so that they can reduce the overall footprint. So, and some of the evidence that I'm seeing by talking to clients, it's sort of based on maybe 20 or 30% even reduction in the overall footprint within the corporate portfolio. So what it means is that there are different ways. There is one way is sort of to sublet the space, and we're seeing again quite a lot of discussions where even HANA is asked to come and help monetize this surplus space, because it's not always just the sublease, and it's going to be quite competitive in this market with the sublease sort of sublet properties coming into market. So we're seeing quite a strong pressure on the rents again in the near future. So and then the landlords will also need to step into this sort of flex game, because they will potentially be fitting out the space or providing shorter term arrangements with the occupiers. But I guess overall the demand is really shrinking, and the flex is becoming a core part of the portfolio. So that's why the hub and spoke model that we just talked about, around 80% of the respondents said that they are still seeing the highly densified urban areas, core locations are still going to be the sort of the place for the hub and as a core location, but it will be smaller. And then, you know, only 25% of the respondents said that they're looking at the suburban locations, but apparently it might increase. So given that people might not want to travel that much to the center. So, and overall, what I want to highlight is that the overall perception of physical space being enabled to productive work is changing, because COVID-19 and working from home demonstrated that people can actually be productive working from distant locations. So again, the purpose of the workplace is changing, with the collaboration, as Earle mentioned, and co-creation becoming a major focus. So, and then just maybe the last point is around sort of the opportunity for flex to provide this buffer for the future. It really is helping corporate executives buy time, because there is a lot of uncertainty, and corporate clients are now reviewing doing the surveys, how many people want to come back into the office. And actually, interestingly, out of those employees who worked full-time from the office, around 60 to 70% are now demanding flexibility. So, and the major concern is that by people coming back in the office, they will lose this option. So I guess what is happening is that people will not want to give away this opportunity to have either part-time arrangements, or even more than that, maybe 2 or 3 days a week working from home, and then a few days coming back in the office. So that's definitely happening across the board, and that will have an impact on the real estate market.
Okay, yeah, and I think we've all seen a lot of articles proclaiming the death of the office as we know it, and I think through the discussion that we've already had in this this particular webinar, we can see that's definitely not the case, and perhaps that sort of short-term crystal ball gazing isn't necessarily going to produce some accurate, predictions of what's going to happen. Yeah. So moving on from that, let's take maybe a mid to long term view in terms of how the flexible office market is going to develop. Earle, I'm going to start with you on that one. So yeah, let's see what you think.
Thanks, Helen. Look, I think there's short term pain and long term gain. And let me just explain that. I think, we all know developers, building owners are now in the business of flex offices, as Lisa has mentioned, and you too, Helen. And it's not surprising, because we're in the age of disruption, not just from technology and biology, but also because the real estate cycle is very different to the business cycle. If you think about the average time that companies go through a major change, it's 7 years. Yet lease length, what are they? Anywhere between 10, 15 to 25 years. And the average age of buildings are 60 years. So it's very conceivable there will be a flight to quality. And we've seen, amazing transformation, revolutionizing of the leasing market. And perhaps that's been augmented by the economic stagnation since the global financial crisis, in terms of the last 10 years, and the liberation of technology that has enabled a flight to more decentralized working and reducing some of those fixed costs. So I think that, there's no doubt that in the immediate term, the short term, there's serious pressure on the flex office space. But those operators who can actually weather the storm, and this might be where building owners and developers actually come to the fore, who might have the stronger balance sheets. If they can weather that storm and really leverage our now much wider acceptance of agile working, you can imagine that becoming a key part of the suite and the canvas of what the workplace is like. And I think furthermore, we're seeing space as a service, in terms of the overall package. So it's not just the location that's really important. It's also the services that landlords offer. And Jeremy mentioned some of the points about technology, how our smartphones are able to literally and metaphorically unlock the office, and also cleaning regimes and so forth. So I think, if we get through this, or operators do, I think there's a key part of the leasing market that will absolutely be about flex.
Okay. Jeremy, what's your thoughts on mid to long term for the flex market?
Yeah, so I think in the midterm, I think there's going to be growth. It's going to bounce back. And in the long term, I think it's going to become a mature market. I think it's going to be an established part of the landscape. And I was just looking this week at some data just come out from the global co-working growth study for 2020, which predicts that actually the number of venues are going to double from 20,000 to 40,000 by 2024. This is a mid-range view.
Yeah.
And there's going to be 5 million people working in these spaces. It's still a small part of the market. I think we need to understand that. And when we first began our deliberations with the BCO, we worked out that actually growth predictions would give the flex space market something like 7% of the total market. So we can't get too carried away. But I think that's a very conservative estimate. And I think COVID is actually going to be an impetus. It's going to be a catalyst for growth. And I think one point that we haven't discussed yet is that flexible space operators can look at secondary space in cities. They can look at subprime locations. And actually, when you've got an offer that's built on flexibility, on ambience, on community, on brand, on service, actually the slightly offbeat locations become more authentic. And you can move office populations into areas that normal corporate occupiers wouldn't consider. And so there's an opportunity to address building obsolescence, and there's an opportunity to reuse buildings and adaptive reuse. And I know that AFK have looked very closely at this. Yeah. Adaptive reuse is going to be a very big thing. Circular economy principles in construction and design, that's going to sit alongside the flex market very well, which is why I think the mid to long-term prospects are good.
Okay, great stuff. Yeah, and also there's that sustainability piece about, you know, the adaptive reuse, of course, you know, which I think chimes very well with what, you know, the property sector is certainly aiming to get a little bit more of. Lisa, can I come to you on your mid to long term views?
Yeah, sure. I actually think I agree with Jeremy and Earle. And I think that in the midterm, we will be seeing quite a bit of competition, actually, because, again, as I mentioned, there's surplus space and all the subleased premises will be competing with flex. So, and then equally, the landlords will be playing a larger part. But I do have a vision for the long term. And I do think that flex can actually help not just to kind of create this buffer or some sort of an option for the large companies to flex in and out, but actually it can play a bigger role from the urban design, because there are some examples of co-working space in Seoul where the sort of social enterprise co-working building was placed in the most deprived area of the city. And then it totally regenerated the whole area. It created this sort of flow of entrepreneurs with the NGO sort of specialism, and then it gentrified the whole area. So it actually, I do believe that the flex is not just serving the purpose of providing this flexibility. It actually can, as Jeremy mentioned, it can repurpose some of the buildings and create a more sustainable usage of real estate in the longer term. And equally, it can revive the whole community and the whole area of the city by providing maybe some of the more affordable office space than it used to be for some parts of the society.
Yeah, I really like that idea of co-working and flexible office space providers almost having that social responsibility in that, you know, sort of furthering different areas. I think there's an awful lot of talk about, you know, developers and flex space operators coming into an area at a stage where it's already really well developed, rather than, you know, being a little bit earlier in the process. So I think that's incredibly interesting, Lisa. Yeah, and hopefully we'll see more of that. Now let's have a look at our polls. So in terms of, will flexible offices be able to weather this workplace storm and re-emerge as a powerful force in the market? Good news, 74% of people think yes. A few people think no, and a couple of people, you know, about a quarter of people uncertain. So I think that's, you know, that's generally a good news, I think, for all concerned. And if we go on to our second polling question, which is your organisation considering reducing your long-term leases and taking up flex office space? Well, we've got just 18% saying yes. No is 69%, and then people who are part of office space requirements will be provided by flex office providers. That's sitting on 13%. So quite a mixed bag there in terms of, what's going forward. So obviously, the long-term lease might be here to stay, but as you say, the flex office space provider is not, it's not a case of it as was previously in the model, providing, a month-on-month offer, but maybe a more long-term model. So I think that's, that's an interesting reflection of where people are thinking and where people are wanting to be in the office. I think I might leave my conclusions until we've had a few questions, because I think that might sit quite well in terms of getting a really rounded picture of not just what you panelists think, but maybe what the audience want to ask, which leads me nicely on to some questions. Andrew Hunter wanted to know how you create corporate identity and culture in flex space, or are those things really outdated concepts? Now I know when HANA first started, you've got quite an interesting approach to sort of developing the occupant's identity and having that dovetailing with your own identity as a flex operator. Do you want to sort of kick off the answer to that, perhaps, Lisa?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thanks, Helen, and thanks for the question. So I guess there are different types of flex operators, and some reinforce their brand and identity. And if you're a small company where you don't have your culture that well established, then you almost associate yourself with the big brand of the flex operator, and then this creates a certain culture within this flex space. Whereas with HANA, we're servicing more sort of grown-up businesses or more mature startups, whereby they already have a certain size of their business, and we enable their culture. So we allow the branding, we allow their signage, we totally support the sort of events, curated events that they will have for their community, not just for the whole community of HANA. So it becomes more a service provider and the flex operator to help those companies have HQ outside of the traditional HQ. And in our setup, 70% of our space is dedicated to private offices. So even within the space itself, you only have 10% of the co-working, which is sort of the lounge, this type of hospitality or hotel type of welcoming experience. And then the rest is really separate private offices that will be fully designed and branded for the companies. So that's why they don't always need to use our co-working space to have this events or certain community experiences. And I guess that the physical space and design of the space, and equally the way how we service our clients, allows us to help create and enable them to create their culture rather than imposing our own.
Okay, interesting. Earle or Jeremy, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd just say that where corporate organizations, own all their own buildings and they have a big glossy HQ, they tend to have a monolithic brand identity or a brand culture, and it's quite easy to operate and probably quite superficial. Where the corporates are now going to have a portfolio of flexible spaces and corporate campuses and hub and spoke models, the whole issue, and I think Andrew Hunter's question is a very good one, the whole issue of how you manage identity and culture becomes much more complicated, and you've got to go in more deeply. And I think culture cannot just be, a logo and a kind of vacuous mission statement. People are going to have to do a much more comprehensive piece around how performance management and people culture and so on. And that's where, as Earle said, the health and well-being thing comes in, so that whatever space you're in, you feel part of a set of values in the company.
Earle, I'm sure you've got something to say from an architectural perspective on creating culture, because I'm sure you get asked that all the time from clients. Make me a landmark office that's going to, reposition my brand and make me the best within the sector. But it's not as straightforward as that, certainly from a design perspective.
No, and I agree for the most part with everything that Jeremy is saying, and I certainly agree with the point that organisation will become much more sophisticated in how they have to manage decentralised as opposed to centralised workforce if we're going to be working from anywhere or home, be it flex. And I think Andrew's question about corporate identity and culture is really interesting, looking relative to the answers to that second question about reducing long-term leases, which was very, in the negative, at, almost 70% of saying, no, we're not going to reduce our leases. And I wonder how much of it that is the respondents are answering that as a result of they are long-term leases and, they're long-term, so we can't affect them. Or how much of it is a view to saying culture, identity, community are really key aspects of how we infuse that into our people, particularly for new starters, and the importance of that being in the office environment. Maybe they're perhaps interlinked.
Okay. Now, I've spied a question about densities, which I know that the BCO is very keen on discussing, so, or at least putting forward, their perspective on that. So, Christopher Allen says, I've observed occupational densities in co-working environments of 1 to 4/1 to 5. If and how will this change in a post-pandemic world? Well, it seems like, if we were going from, dropping by and sitting next to people and having that, encounter over a coffee to, it being very much not the case. So let's talk densities. So I don't know, so Lisa, have we got any thoughts on that perhaps?
Yeah, so definitely. And again, it's just, I guess there are different approaches to density, and in the traditional co-working environment, you will see quite a densely populated space. What we're doing now, and a lot of the clients are asking for this sort of social distancing. So we are giving the space, and then we allow the occupiers to apply their own densities. So what it means is that we're not enforcing the HANA density ratio by kind of, saying, here's your tiny desk, and you're going to be crammed with other sort of occupiers at a very limited distance. What we're saying is that we are actually letting on the square footage basis, and then a lot of the corporates are saying that whether they want this sort of 2-meter separation, and then we do provide the desks and can fit it up with the desks as the HANA recommended density, which is around in the current environment, we have around 45-50 square feet per desk. But then again, we don't occupy every single desk, so we allow this sort of every other desk to be occupied. But again, we do offer a lot of flexibility because of the private office nature of our offering, and then the clients can actually use the square footage and quite cellularized setup that we have by utilizing the internal meeting rooms, internal focus rooms to create this even further more generous density, because you don't always have to have 25 square feet per desk or 30 desks as in a traditional flex office.
Now, I know in our research, Earle and Jeremy, that we looked at density quite a lot, and it was one of those things that we really wanted to uncover. So it feels like it's almost flipped on its head in terms of, expected density and what the reality is in the post-COVID landscape. So, Earle, can you talk us through kind of that journey about what we were and what we might expect in the future?
Sure. Thanks, Helen. Yeah, look, I was really disappointed in what our research uncovered, because I've often heard and been an advocate of really winding the densities down, so intensifying the densities. And that certainly happens, but the blended rate, as we found, is across the most buildings is 1 in 10 thereabouts. So yes, of course, trading floors for financial institutions are tighter. I think Bishopsgate we've got 1 in 6 in some locations. But I think, notwithstanding where we are today, we're midsummer, life is good, the sky is blue. I think we have to take a long-term rather than a temporal view of all of this. And we have a particular concern right now about social distancing. Who knows what this future will be? 1918, the Spanish flu came and went, and life continued. We find a vaccine that might be something of which social distancing becomes a different issue relative to densities. I think the key thing is about connectivity socially, and how all those things that we've talked about in terms of community and culture imbue themselves into the workplace. The great thing about flex office spaces is that they're kind of like a sponge or an accordion. You can vary that density, and with the technology piece that you asked about, we'll soon be able to determine, how busy and how occupied those spaces are to make those choices.
Okay. Now, Jeremy, I'm sure you've got some thoughts on density as well. I'm sure that's been part of your research for a number of years in terms of how that's sort of ebbed and flowed. So
Yeah.
let's see if we can hear that.
I mean, you know, if you look at the recent history of workplace design, it has all been towards greater density, because the general line of travel has been, you know, let's get people mingling more, let's have more chance encounters, let's have much higher density, because not only will it create collaboration and teamwork and innovation, but it will also help with property costs. And suddenly, with the pandemic, we're shooting into reverse. And I think the flex operators that are going to be most successful in the post-pandemic era are the ones that go to more of an activity-based working model with a wider mix of different settings. And I was talking recently to a very well-known Silicon Valley workplace designer, Primo Orpia, who was saying that actually, you know, when you've got these lower density Silicon Valley spaces with lots of different areas, and people can choose the quiet nook and cranny in which to work, and people then move to the private spaces in what is essentially an open office, but it has a range of different settings. I think that's one strategy amongst many that flex space providers can adopt in order to address what is a clear challenge of high density spaces, which are no longer relevant in the current era. But just to pick up on Earle's point, he mentioned the Spanish flu of 1918. Within a few years, we had, as a direct result of that global pandemic, we had modernist design, clean, hard surfaces, get rid of the old drapes that were full of bugs, get rid of, let's have glass and concrete and metal, and let's have a clean, modern environment. We don't yet know what will be the major design imperative following COVID-19. It could be that there's a whole kind of new workplace design movement that arises, but it's just too early to tell. I think we're on the cusp of big, big changes, but we're not sure what the shape of those will be. What I do know is that flexible operators will adapt and change to create lower density spaces.
Yeah, so out with the drapes and in with some more, you know, modern, you know, seamless, you know, solid surface materials and kind of, yeah, modern. I quite like that idea.
That happened 100 years ago. Yeah, we'll probably find more sophisticated ways to address the current public health crisis that we've got.
Of course, and we've seen that already with how technology can embrace that, and how, you know, we've got, you know, sophisticated ways of looking at air conditioning and air quality, maybe even combining the two. I can see a day when people will, you know, be literally examining the air quality on an app that as they arrive to make sure that it, you know, it's to suit them. So that I think that'll be an incredibly interesting development. How, you know, the physical environment and the tech environment will merge to you know, give people personal choice. There's a question about the BCO perhaps looking at their density guidelines in terms of everything from space utilization to lifts to toilets to air conditioning and what have you. So I think that's something that, you know, it'll be interesting to see how they address that particular standards. But perhaps, yeah, I wanted to come to that question about pricing. I think, Lisa, you touched on, you know, how the HANA's offer to how it might, you know, how that might be going forward. So Luke Thurlow says, is there a long-term shift to flex? How will this be reflected in pricing? Will flex fall in line with traditional leased space? And if flex becomes the new normal, does the premium for shorter term flexibility become dissolved? So that's quite a lot of things to kind of take on board, Lisa, but I'm sure you're...
No, of course, yeah, we'll navigate that. But thank you. That is a really, really good question, actually, because I guess in the very much cost reduction mood that everyone is in, it's a primary question that we're being asked. So I guess there are different answers to that. So we're looking at pay-as-you-use package or model, whereby, and I know that, you know, large operators who can benefit from the multi-market presence, and that is appealing to big occupiers who want to just give this passporting rights and then say, you can use all our assets across the world, come in, pre-book the desk, and then you pay only when you use the desk. So I do believe that there will be more shift from the subscription model to pay-as-you-use model, and then it kind of ties into the technology question that we just discussed with the utilization and tracking and really knowing how many people come in. Another question is really not just per desk. So there was a lot of ambiguity before because it was more sort of per desk per month type of metric that was used. Now we're not applying this anymore. It's actually all about per person. So you can actually have one desk, but 2 people or 3 people using it in shifts, and different companies might have 1 week when 1 person comes in or different days. So I feel like there will be a different pricing mechanism to actually allow people to come into space and use the desk and with all the cleaning regimes adhered rather than just selling a desk as it was before. So it seems like it's a much more fixed and obsolete metric already. And then what HANA is doing also pricing per square footage. So we have this HANA Select offering. So it's again, maybe more tailored to the larger occupiers, but what we do is offer the space, so it's competing more with the traditional lease offering, whereby the corporate client doesn't need to take the traditional traditional lease space and then build all the meeting rooms, build all the workstations. We can actually make it more tailored and bespoke to the client with a dedicated reception, with their own meeting space, but then we will know how it's utilized, and then maybe more people come into this space. So definitely the price tag of Flex is becoming more adaptive, and it's a package. So for example, we will be offering a dedicated space that's maybe 2 or 3 times less than what the client will take in the traditional lease, but then we will give a access to the wardroom that is utilized maybe 30% of the time. So there is no need to build out your own that will be then idle for some period of time. So it's almost a package of your workstations plus co-working desks plus the meeting space, and it's all based on the what is the type of activity happening in the office, how many people need to come in, how often, rather than saying I need 20,000 square feet and this will be fixed for 10 years. So that definitely is putting the traditional leases in a more disadvantaged position versus Flex.
Yeah, okay. So plenty of options there in terms of pricing, and maybe sort of more just a more sophisticated model of pricing, which will appeal to a broader demographic of potential occupiers, which is great. I know we're maybe coming towards the end of the session, but there's one question which I think, Earle, I might come to you on that one, because you touched on it before and I thought it was quite interesting. So it's about learning opportunities, especially for the more junior team members. And if the workforce becomes, say, disparate, how do we facilitate that learning, and how does perhaps flexible working, and maybe you can reflect on your own organization and how that might be applied to what might happen in the flexible space offering. I just thought it was interesting, seeing as you touched on how perhaps the younger generations are missing out in the workspace at the moment, working from home.
Yeah, we hear that a lot, and the face of our business is that we've got a number of projects that are startingly commencing during this period. So we're bringing on some new staff. And the onboarding experience, the virtual onboarding experience is very, very different to that which can be conducted within the workplace. I think also to, I think it was Andrew Hunter's question about workplace culture and identity. You walk through the doors of plenty of organisations, be they in some of the great spaces that HANA have and how they incorporate their own identity there, or larger single-use occupiers for perhaps issues of confidentiality or whatever they might be. And you're immediately imbued with that sense of culture and the way things are done. So I think that, and also again, going back to that second question and the very clear response that you got from that, suggests that, the learning, the mentoring, and the engagement of the workplace is something that's really, really key. I just think, as Lisa and Jeremy have said, we'll be finding new ways of doing that across a more rich variety of palette of stuff. And isn't it fantastic? We've seen an opening of and a much greater acceptance of activity-based working. And we'll see a blurring, I think, of flex office space and centralized space, both in terms of the material authenticity, if you like, and also the use of space. So interesting times.
Interesting. I was just going to say, and you've stolen my line. Interesting times indeed. Well, look, I think the key is adaptability. So adaptability, whether that's the pricing options we've got, whether that's how the space looks, incorporating technology, realizing that not everyone who in the office is going to want the same thing at the same time, and providing different options for different generations and different personality types, I think is really key. And that, you know, the future for the flexible office market in a post-COVID world is on the whole quite bright in the mid to long term, and that yeah, there's definitely opportunities out there. So I'd like to thank my panelists and also the audience for sending in some fantastic questions. I'm sure there's a way that we can pick up on any questions that weren't answered during the session. So yeah, thank you everyone. It's been a really interesting discussion, I think.